Alright, old Lord of the Rings is popping off, and there's a bunch of serialized marketing the wizard crib from baseball cards. Cool, but there's a bunch of new design space that they're dipping into for this set that's interesting, and we're going to be talking about Tom Bombadil today, buddy. This poor guy got cut right out of the trilogy. You got Tom Bombadil, a white, a blue, a black, a red, and a green for legendary creature God Bard. It's a 4/4. As long as there are 4 or more lore counters among sagas you control, Tom Bombadil has hexproof and indestructible, 2 very powerful keywords. Whenever the final chapter ability of a saga you control resolves, reveal cards from the top of your library until you reveal a saga card. Put that card onto the battlefield and the rest on the bottom of your library in a random order. This ability triggers only once each turn. Doesn't push you in any particular direction, but Tom is an interesting character. Sagas are all over the map in terms of their effects. In any case, this guy's interesting because it deals with sagas. This is something we haven't seen before, and as such, let's take a moment to refresh ourselves on the rules regarding sagas. As the saga enters the battlefield, its controller puts a lore counter on it. As your pre-combat main phase begins, immediately after your draw step, you put another lore counter on each saga you control. Putting a lore counter on a saga in either of these ways does not use the stack. Each symbol on the left of a saga's text box represents a chapter ability. A chapter ability is a triggered ability that triggers when a lore counter that is put on the saga causes the number of lore counters on the saga to become equal to the ability's chapter number. Chapter abilities are put on the stack and may be responded to. So Tom Bombadil needs the final chapter of the saga to resolve, and it's a triggered ability. So if it doesn't resolve for some reason, say it gets stifled, it doesn't trigger Tom's ability. Tom only triggers once each turn, but you can trigger him on your opponent's turn if you somehow can add counters or proliferate counters with cards like Clock Spinning. So that's 1 blue mana for an instant, has buyback for 3. Choose a counter on target permanent or suspended card, remove that counter from that permanent or card, or put another of those counters on it. Or if you wanted to keep a saga around for whatever reason, you can remove counters with cards like Power Conduit. You also have a card like Resourceful Defense, 2 and a white for an enchantment. Whenever a permanent you control leaves the battlefield, if it had counters on it, put those counters on target permanent you control. Has 4 and a white, move any number of counters from target permanent you control to target permanent you control. So you can take the lore counters, put them on Tom Bombadil for a few minutes, and you can pay 4 and a white, move it over to another saga, which seems insane to me, but hey, listen, that's what we're doing. Wow, dude, we're delving deep into saga rules. We're going to do a rules break right now, but take a moment. If you like these videos, stop and subscribe. Hit that little thumbs up button. It goes a long way towards helping the channel because I don't do a Patreon or any of that. I have a little buy me a coffee sub. Sometimes people buy me a coffee over there, and that's nice, all right? Alright, some other rulings regarding sagas. A chapter ability doesn't trigger if a lore counter is put on a saga that already had a number of lore counters greater than or equal to that chapter's number. For example, the 3rd lore counter put on a saga causes the 3rd chapter ability to trigger, but 1 and 2 won't trigger again. So once you put the chapter 3 on there, the trigger goes off. You don't get a second round with chapter 3. And once a chapter ability has triggered, the ability on the stack won't be affected if the saga gains or loses counters or if it leaves the battlefield. Pretty self-explanatory there. If you put the saga counter on there, the triggered ability goes on the stack just like any other triggered ability or activated ability. If the permanent is then destroyed, say you tap your Alando or something, the ability goes in the stack even if somebody responds by destroying Alando. If multiple chapter abilities trigger at the same time, their controller puts them on the stack in any order. If any of them require targets, those targets are chosen. If any of them require togas, alright? If any of them require targets, those targets are chosen as you put the abilities on the stack before any of those abilities resolve. So if you had a doubling season out there, when your saga enters the battlefield, you put 2 counters on it simultaneously, order the triggers any way you want. Counters are removed from a saga. The appropriate chapter abilities will trigger again when the saga receives lore counters. Removing lore counters won't cause a previous chapter ability to trigger. So say you had a vampire hex mage and you had 2 lore counters on a Phyrexian scripture. Before your turn, you sacrifice the vampire hex mage, remove all the counters from Phyrexian scriptures. Well, now you put a lore counter on during your turn in your pre-combat main phase and start the chain all over again. Alright, this last one's a little weird. Once the number of lore counters on a saga is greater than or equal to the greatest number among its chapter abilities, the saga's controller sacrifices it as soon as its chapter ability has left the stack, most likely by resolving or being countered. This number could be 0 if the saga has lost all of its native abilities. This is a state-based action, doesn't use the stack. So we have some interesting rules regarding sagas. They're probably not as interesting to you as they are to me, and everyone has entered a coma at this point in the video. It begs the question though, is Tom Bombadil a viable commander? Well, there are currently 85 sagas legal in paper. I'm sure there'll be more released in upcoming sets. A couple have already been spoiled, but how many of them are good? That's a good question. There are some real bombs that aren't super viable unless we're cheating them in. There are these sagas from the 40k decks, and then we have cards like the Kami War. So this little saga is 1 in Wooburg for an enchantment saga. First chapter is 1, exile target non-land permanent an opponent controls. Second chapter, return up to 1 other target non-land permanent to its owner's hand, then each opponent discards a card. And 3 is exile it, return it to the battlefield transformed under your control. Transforms into Okagachi Made Manifest, enchantment creature Dragon Spirit. This guy's all colors, has flying and trample. Whenever Okagachi attacks, defending player chooses a non-land card in your graveyard. Return that card to your hand. Okagachi Made Manifest gets +X/+0 until end of turn, where X is the mana value of that card. It's a 6/6. So yeah man, sagas are great and all, and you can glean lots of value, but sagas are also enchantments, don't forget that. There's definitely a 5-color enchantment payoff shell you can build around old Tom Bombadil. There are 1,000,001 of these payoffs. You got Eidolon of Blossoms, Setessan Champion, cards like that, and then Sithis, Harvest Hand. Green and a white for a legendary enchantment creature Nymph. Whenever you cast an enchantment spell, you gain 1 life and draw a card. It's a 1/2. Most of these enchantresses and payoffs are in white and green anyway, so these are your fixing colors in a 5-color deck. Alright, so though Tom Bombadil is leading into sagas, you could build into really impactful sagas with an enchantment shell, and boom, you got a deck, buddy. There are plenty of tutors you could use to get your key enchantments to add consistency to your deck as well. You're in 5 colors, so if you just want to buy a vampiric tutor, demonic tutor, you can do that. That's a little on the nose. Consider the old Moonblessed Cleric, 2 and a white for a creature, human elf cleric. It's a 3/2. Has Divine Intervention. When it enters the battlefield, you may search your library for an enchantment card, reveal it, shuffle your library, and put that card on top. Or you got Enlightened Tutor out there getting the enchantment to library top at instant speed. If you have a saga that's about to pop, stack the top and plop your mop, brother. Alright, but don't forget about old Tom. You got a 4/4 with hexproof and indestructible as long as you got 4 saga counters out there. So it's not a bad stat line for a Voltron commander, or at least a commander that prevents a credible combat threat. And there are tons of auras that increase power and toughness, like Ancestral Mask, All That Glitters, Auramancer's Guise. You got Ethereal Armor out there, Mantle of the Ancients, Sage's Reverie, one of my favorites. So you're in 5 colors. You can pick and choose the right ones of the ones that you want to include. And your sagas are going to be popping. I mean, people are going to destroy your enchantments. The creature that you put the auras on is going to go to the graveyard, so you want some mass recursion late game. You got Brilliant Restoration, Open the Vaults, you have Replenish, but that's $1 million. Your sagas put themselves in the graveyard, so these are fantastic to be holding late game. So what do you guys think of the old God Bard? I think if you want a saga commander, there is literally none better because there are no others. I like it. Seems not super strong outside some crazy combos, but fun, and that's the name of the game. I mean, the poor guy got written out of the whole trilogy. Every time they make a Lord of the Rings movie, they forget about old Tom Bombadil, which is maybe the way he wants it. Maybe he's influencing him with his magic from beyond the veil, dude. I don't know. This is Nicky G from Better Commander signing off.